Tuesday night, 8 o'clock, and this is the Bob Leonard Show. We'll be with you for about an hour, and what we do is we take the stories that you've been reading about in your newspaper this week and watching on television, and we put our spin on it. We try to go behind the story and tell you what's really happening with that story. And like we tell you every week, too, that if you miss Tuesday night's show, which is at 8 o'clock, we rebroadcast it at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock on Wednesday night. And also it's on continuous show on the internet on flinttalk.com. You just punch that in and it'll have this show and other shows from the past for about 8 or 10 weeks back. So if you miss it here, you can get it in those two places. You know, like we tell you every week, it's only our opinion, and you can accept or reject it, but we're obviously going to have our say. Sometimes people talk to me about the fact that our show often just is rather negative. And you have to understand that what we do is we try to go behind the stories that the politicians and the business people, union people put out and tell you what's really behind those stories, because they're only going to tell you the positive things. The negative things they don't want you to know about. So that's our job, is to go out there and find out if there's anything behind that story that the politicians are not telling you about, or the government officials aren't telling you about, and tell you on this program. So it will have a tendency to be negative because, as I say, the politician, the business people, the government official who are distributing the story is really in control of what is printed and what is said on television. So they don't have that control of us. So that's why, we will have a tendency to have negative stories, because we're looking for what's behind the positive story that has been already put out. But anyway, tonight we have a number of things we want to get to, and here's some good news, I think. The Flint School Superintendent, Walter Milton, appears to be going someplace other than Flint. Now, we'll talk about that tonight, and you decide whether that's good or bad. We have our opinion on it, and we want to share it with you. And then we have a case of an ex-police officer charged in a hit and run, and I'm sure you saw it in the Journal. Ex-officer charged in hit and run, former Flint cop accused of cover-up in Marine's death. Tonight we'll talk about how this guy and the fellow he covered up the story with, the accident with, could have avoided all this trouble by just doing the right thing. And then we have a Smiley clone, in my opinion. Paula Zelenko has entered the city of Burton Mayor's race, claiming that she's her own person with no ties to the Smiley's corrupt political machine. Does she or doesn't she? We'll talk about that. And then, there's kind of a bad case that happened this week. A woman and her daughter are abducted, sexually assaulted, and robbed in broad daylight in Flint, on a Flint street. Happened to be in a gas station, but it's in Flint. What's being done to arrest this assailant? Now, has solving this outrageous crime been given top priority by the police, or is it just another case, part of a stack of cases to be investigated when they have time? Now, we'll get to these stories tonight, but let's begin by revisiting a story we brought you last week and ask the question, has anything been done about the case where a male principal at Goodridge Middle School sat in on an 8th grade sex education class, and according to the teacher and the students who were teaching, the teacher teaching the class, said the principal's acts of barking and whistling at the students who were attending the class was that sexual harassment. The teacher said it was. Now, complaints have been made to the district superintendent. And what we have to say is, what's been done about it? Here's the journal story, and I think it's important that I read it to you so you understand what it's about. It says, a Goodrich parent is claiming his daughter and other students at the school are being sexually harassed by a middle school principal. And coincidentally, these claims originated in an 8th grade sex education class. We're told the lesson was on sexual harassment. One student asked the teacher, is barking at the girl sexual harassment? The teacher said yes. The student then asked, what about whistling? The teacher said yes. So then the student asked, so why does the middle school principal do this to us? After that, the female students in the class signed a petition. One of the parents' daughters also hand-wrote a list of inappropriate acts she claims middle school girls have witnesses by the principal. This is unacceptable behavior out of an educator, the parent said. The parent is referring to the barking and whistling at the female students. He says he spoke to the other parents who share his concerns and were very upset when they learned the principal also sat in on the sex education class. They separate the boys and the girls, obviously, to talk female to female or male to male, so that is he going back in there? The parent asked. The parent took his concern to Goodrich School Superintendent Kim Hart, who claims the principal was just passing through the room. That isn't what the kids say. The superintendent says she's received 3 complaint calls and is investigating. Hart, the superintendent, says these claims are being blown out of proportion, but she would never want the students to think their thoughts or concerns are going unheard. She says the district has a strict sexual harassment policy at the schools. Would she consider barking and whistling sexual harassment? Listen to her comment. This is the superintendent. It depends on the situation, she said. It depends on the person. If it's just barking like there was a dog in a room, that's not sexual harassment. The parent who makes a living as an account manager finds it hard to believe. If you did that as an account manager, you'd be fired, he said. There's sexual harassment policies. You just don't do that in today's time. The superintendent says the middle school principal has worked at the school for more than 20 years and has no history of the problems like this. But anyway, Hart says the claims are all blown out of proportion. Then she says, but she doesn't want the students to think their thoughts or concerns go unheard. Well, you know, isn't that statement a slight contradiction? What does she think the students will believe when, on the one hand, she says she thinks they're overreacting, and on the other hand, she says the students' concerns will be heard? Isn't this kind of telling the kids she'll be just going through the motions because she has already made up her mind? And then her reference to barking would be okay if barking was like a dog in the room, she says. You know, what the hell is she talking about? There's no dog, just 12 and 13-year-old girls attending a sex education class. You know, while barking and whistling by even a young male classmate may still be considered sexual harassment if the acts are unwanted, They are clearly unacceptable and very suspicious, especially when a man, 30 years the girl's senior, makes such a solicitous manifestation. I'm sure parents of these young girls want to know what the final disposition of this matter will be. Why was that man sitting in this classroom making what some might consider to be clearly inappropriate utterances coming from a man, as I say, 30 years the girl's senior? Is this normal? Well, we'll be watching this incident, and we'll get back to you if any further action is taken. I'm sure some people out there would be interested in that. We'll see. Now, it would appear the controversial Flint school superintendent, Walter Milton, may be gone. Here's the headlines in the Flint Journal. It says, Milton accepts Illinois job. Flint board left looking for sixth boss since 2001. You know, in my opinion, his departure on the long run will not be detrimental to the Flint school system. He's been trying to get out of here since he arrived. And a lot of it is that he couldn't stand the scrutiny by the press that he caused by his lack of candidness. Remember his resume? Said he was a PhD and he wasn't. And then the knowledge about his friend's past, just to name a few. Also his reorganization plan, he and his friend Anthony introduced into the Flint system to say, as delicate as I can, was disruptive and full of confusion. From the overcrowded classrooms and sudden mid-year classroom moves from one school to the other, remember the Southwestern to McKinley, and to the unacceptable shortages in classroom supplies and textbooks. And it's still going on. This school system, because of these things, because of his action, was in turmoil, with students, teachers, parents in total confusion on the future direction of the school. You know, he comes in here and he summarily eliminates some popular and successful projects. This upset people. You know, these projects like the Challenge Program for gifted and talented students and the Host Reading Program for reading improvement on kids that are having trouble reading. They had 425 volunteers. These people were totally disappointed and even some angry on the part of the students, the parents, the teachers, and the volunteers. You know, these kinds of ill-advised moves, when he arrived here, with little or no consultation with those involved, caused many students to leave the schools. We lost 800 last year, 1,500 projected this year. When you lose, keep in mind, when you lose students, you lose money that the state is providing for you, like $7,500 a student. Now you lose 1,500 students next year, times that 7,500, that's a lot of money. It was a lot of money we lost with losing 800 students. And there are parents who, in this article, are quoted as saying they left, for example, because he cut out these programs. Now he says, well, I've come up with other programs. But these were proven successful programs he cut out. Why do that? Just wants to put his name on the new programs? You know, these mistakes in his own personal shortcomings has caused the distrust and caused the district considerable embarrassment and loss of reputation. Here's the story on Milton leaving the school district. Can you play that, please?
Superintendent Dr. Walter Milton finally breaks his silence. He is already one of 2 finalists for a job in Illinois, and in less than 24 hours, the district could know if Milton's time in the Flint School District is up. ABC 12's BC O'Leary spoke to him this evening. She joins us live from the Sarvis Conference Center with more. BC?
Angie, Dr. Milton says that recently he has been the target of many negative remarks and attacks concerning this possible move, but besides all this, he is keeping an eye to the future, but he says that his priority remains in Flint. Flint Community Schools could lose another superintendent any day now. After less than 2 years with the district, Dr. Walter Milton is up for a similar job in Springfield, Illinois. He says already people are trying to ruin his reputation for a job he doesn't have.
Well, I think that a lot of the remarks have been very salacious, really defaming and somewhat of a character assassination, if you will. But at the same time, I've learned to kind of put those things aside and just keep the focus on children.
Milton says the job would bring his family closer to relatives, but some believe several controversies during his time in Flint likely has something to do with it. We are told a decision on whether he gets the job could come Thursday or Friday. Milton says he doesn't know.
Actually, I have not asked for a date in terms of a decision being made, and I think that's up to the folks there.
It's not ideal by any means.
Right now, the district is in the midst of a budget crisis, and it's not even 1 year into a massive school reform plan that Milton helped spearhead. School board member Paul Jordan feels the pressure.
Places a greater responsibility on we, the board members, to provide a consistent direction.
But for now, that guidance is still coming from Dr. Milton.
It hasn't happened. I mean, my focus right now is to focus on the children in Flint Community Schools, and I'm going to continue to do that.
And tonight, Milton said that he has a lot of work to do. Reporting live in Flint, I'm BC O'Leary, ABC.
Now, it behooves me to say this. He talks about being criticized and his character. Listen, the press is only reporting what he's created. He's created the reorganization. He created the resume that was false. He created bringing his good friend in here to be second in command, who had sexually assaulted a 3-year-old boy, allegedly. That was his record. Now, to suggest he's being mistreated, I mean, come on. He's the guy that caused the problems that he's facing today. Can you play that other tape? Here's a tape by Channel 12. I think it's a pretty good job of explaining what some of his problems were. Can you play that, please?
District. However, since he's arrived, he's been embroiled in controversy. ABC 12's Matt Franklin reports.
The Flint community was first introduced to Walter Milton in August 2005. Many on the school board believe Milton was the man who could bring innovative ideas to the district.
We have to really hold on to is having a school system that's really going to be dedicated to addressing the issues that children have.
A tall task for a district that has been hammered by declining enrollment and fewer dollars from the state. Milton also faced personal challenges himself. He apologized after reports surfaced questioning his educational background. Then it was back to shaking things up in the district.
Going to require that we give them a strong, rigorous academic instructional process so that they can move forward.
In 2006, he introduced a reform plan that was designed to create an intense academic environment for students. The nationally recognized plan consolidated classes and closed buildings, at the same time causing confusion, turmoil, and in some cases classroom overcrowding. But still, controversy followed Milton. He fought allegations from his previous district in New York of financial mismanagement. Then in September, his business partner and district employee Julius Anthony resigned after a background check found in 1996 he was charged with molesting a 3-year-old Georgia boy. Anthony pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, and this year a judge set aside the conviction. Milton says he didn't know about Anthony's past. Milton has been working with a partially divided board to execute several job cuts to help get the district out of an $8 million deficit. And with so much work still needed to be done, some wonder who will lead the district if he decides to leave. Matt Franklin, ABC 12 News.
Now, I should note that when Milton came in here and we learned of this problem with his resume and his credentials, which he misrepresented, we said you ought to give the guy a chance. And we were for supporting him on this effort. But then all these other things start popping up. And then what bothered me considerably was the fact he would never assume the responsibility for his actions. This was disturbing as his personal deficiencies. So, you know, to mention a few, you know, the credential misrepresentation. He said he had a PhD. He had no PhD. Now, when you ask, why did he put that in, he blames it on his wife's typing or something. Didn't he check it? I frankly think he knew what he was doing. He wanted to give the impression he had that PhD, and he didn't have to do that. He could have waited. He had it coming up in 3 or 4 or 5 months or 6 months or whatever it was. He ultimately got it. But, you know, his judgment is bad. You know, when he hired his friend and business partner, Julius Anthony, as a second in command of the Flint schools, he claims he didn't know that Anthony had pleaded guilty or had a criminal record of sexually assaulting a 3-year-old boy. He blames Anthony for not telling him. What Milton doesn't acknowledge here was if he had followed the state law and had fingerprinted Anthony, and there was a record check before he was hired, which is required by law, and wasn't done here, the district would have learned of his sexual history and hopefully not hired him and exposed our children to a dangerous pedophile. This was Milton's failure by not following the law. It wasn't Anthony not telling him. Anthony lied on his application about it. But I'm not so sure, again, that Milton didn't know about his record. You know, he did some strange things. He was advised at least 5 or 6 or 7 times by the administrators who are in charge of fingerprinting all people working for the school district, which is required by state law. And before you hire them, the records have to be checked. Milton didn't have his fingerprints taken for at least 8-9 months after he was here and after he had hired Anthony, whether by contract and then later as an employee. That seems strange, because they were the only 2 in the district that hadn't been fingerprinted. Now, if he gets fingerprinted and agrees to be fingerprinted, I'm sure they would have been on Anthony. And the only reason we found out about Anthony wasn't because Milton agreed to be fingerprinted. He was told the press was looking at this and that the teachers union had filed a Freedom of Information to find out what the history and record was of he and Anthony. Then he was forced to give his fingerprints, and that's where it came up about Anthony. Very, very questionable here. And then we have a $5.1 million school deficit that occurred in Milton's first year that he blamed on the last superintendent, even though it was overspent in his administration. Granted, the budget was prepared by the previous administration, by the previous superintendent, but the fact of the matter is, for that year, couldn't he see he was overspending? You know, when he was in New York, he had some question about finances in New York in that school district that he held just before he came to Flint. You heard Channel 12 describe that. And of course, as I say, he blames the previous superintendent, even though he was in charge of spending the money. And then we have it disclosed by the Journal that Milton's administration had violated state law again, and the school district policy violating that also, by overspending for books by $3 million. The school system is now in debt to the book company for that money. Milton claims he didn't know about that overspending until it really came out in the press. Again, he blames his friend Anthony, who he put in a position as a school employee responsible for buying the books for the district. I'm telling you, this thing needs a criminal investigation. Why were they violating the state law? The state law says you can't overspend by so much without getting approval. And then the city or the school district had policies of that you couldn't spend over a certain amount above the budget without getting approval from the school board. Something like 12 or 20,000 something. This is $3 million. It's hard to believe that the Milton administration would overspend $3 million in his budget and Milton not be told it was happening or had happened. And finally, the coup de grace of blame game is when he blames the press for all his bad press, even though the press was telling the stories about his shortcomings. You know, here in the Journal article, when he was thinking about moving on April 7th, it says, Milton said the main factor for the moves was to be closer to his family, but he also said he was stung by the criticism in Flint. He's quoted as saying, I wouldn't say this was overreaching reason, but I'm human. It did have an effect on me, said Milton. Well, you know, the criticism were all the mistakes he made. And he was the cause of the criticism, but he won't accept that. You know, he blames his wife, he blames the former school superintendent, he blames the press, he blames Anthony, you know, for all these problems. And all of them could have been avoided if he had done the right thing. In my mind, such tactics of never assuming responsibility for errors he was responsible for and always blaming others suggest a serious character flaw and ultimately would be even more harmful to the Flint school system if he stayed. Now, I don't know if that's considered salacious as he suggests, but I suggest he ought to look at himself in the mirror and see who caused these problems and who caused the distrust in his operation. Let's go on here to another story. Here's a story that a Flint officer charged in hit and run. We talked about that. The fellow that was charged was Mitchell Manuel, 22, is charged with aiding and abetting the failure to stop at the scene of an accident resulting in serious impairment or death and an accessory after the fact. And I'll get into that. Manuel's former high school classmate Brian Abbott, 23 of Carlisle, is charged with failure to stop at the scene of an accident resulting in serious impairment. So you've got these two guys, one driving a car, who is charged with failure to stop, and the second person, who is the ex-cop, coming along and sees his friend in trouble and makes these terrible decisions and suggestions, and he's charged with 2 crimes. You know, here's a tragedy for everyone involved. You know, the young Marine, recently back from duty in Iraq, was tragically killed when he was struck by a car while walking on a kind of a poorly lit road in a rural area. You know, he stopped after striking the Marine, the driver. And then a friend of the driver, a Flint cop, who was since charged with 2 crimes, just coming off duty from a police officer, and driving home, sees his friend, stops at the scene, and then he comes up with these ideas. You know, we told you about this on this program before, about 4 weeks ago when it first happened. We told you that if the individual who was driving the car stayed there, called 911, he'd have no problem, because the facts would indicate that he wasn't negligent. The young Marine, for some reason, was walking along the middle of the road. It wasn't, there was no light. And the driver, who there's no evidence he was drunk and no evidence he was speeding, comes over the crest of a hill, and there's the Marine. And he strikes him, tragically killing the young man. But the issue is, was the driver guilty of any crime? Like, in order to be charged with negligent homicide, you have to be guilty of some negligence that caused the death. And I'm sure he wasn't. And I said then that if he does the right thing there, everything would have been fine. But what happens, his friend comes along, sees what's happened, says to the driver, "Come on with me, take your car, we'll drive up to my house just up the street here, and put your car in the garage. And then I'll go back and make a 911 call like I just came upon the scene and won't even mention you." So they take the driver's car that had just killed the Marine up to the cop's garage, parks it in there, comes back to the scene, and the driver of the car leaves. So the police officer calls 911, and there was certain information on the phone which caused 911 to be suspicious, and ultimately all of this was exposed. Like I said, if the driver had stopped, stayed there, called 911 himself, none of this would have happened. Now, you know, it's a great tragedy that the Marine was killed. You know, there's no way you can express greater sympathy for the family than to recognize the tragedy here of that. But there is kind of the secondary tragedy of these 2 people committing crimes that were the result of the accident that didn't have to be committed. You know, they've ruined their lives. That's what that case is all about. Well, let's go on here. You know, the newest, we'll play that tape. I think I want to see that tape about the accident.
News, your safest place in bad weather.
A former Flint police officer and a cryo man had just learned they will both face criminal charges for a hit-and-run accident that killed a mid-Michigan Marine. Good evening, I'm Angie Hendershot.
And I'm Bill Harris. In January, police say 23-year-old Ricky Salas Jr. was struck and killed as he was walking down Farron Road in Genesee County's Vienna Township. ABC 12's Taryn Escher joins us now with who authorities believe is responsible for Ricky's death. Taryn?
Sadly and tragically, the Genesee County prosecutor says partly Ricky himself, who was walking down the middle of a dark road the night he was hit.
Forced to leave his car behind after landing in a ditch, Ricky Salas Jr., who was drunk, according to toxicology reports, began walking down Farron Road in Vienna Township, where he would soon meet his fate.
Mr. Salas is wearing dark clothes, and I'm not sure that Mr. Abbott ever saw him.
Investigators say Brian Abbott was driving east on Farron Road. Off-duty Flint police officer Mitchell Manuel was driving west and saw Abbott hit Salas with his Trailblazer. In a matter of moments, 3 lives would change forever.
Everybody made mistakes.
Abbott and Manuel pulled over to see what happened and dialed 911. But from there, prosecutor David Layton says Officer Manuel helped cover up the crime. He hid Abbott's Trailblazer at his home a half a mile away and told Abbott to go home.
And there is some imbalance in the charging, but the fact is this is what we have. Mr. Manuel committed 2 crimes in my judgment. Mr. Abbott committed 1 crime in my judgment.
Prosecutor Layton charged Abbott and Manuel for leaving the scene, but Manuel is also charged with covering it up.
We're not able to show that there was any negligence at all on the part of Mr. Abbott.
Although prosecutor Layton couldn't find criminal negligence, the family's attorney believes he can find civil negligence and says they plan to sue both Manuel and Abbott. Manuel's attorney says they are shocked the driver was charged with a less serious crime than Officer Manuel, who has been fired from Flint PD. Now, Abbott's attorney says his client plans to accept responsibility. Both, we're told, are expected to turn themselves in next week. Live in the newsroom, Taryn Asher, ABC 12.
Well, this all happened this past week, and if you were watching our program 4 weeks ago when this first came up, you would have known all this was happening, because that's exactly what happened in regard to this young man, because clearly there was no negligence to charge him for causing the death of this person. The crimes were all after the fact that didn't have to be committed. What a terrible tragedy. You know, the newest candidate for the city of Burton mayor is, interestingly enough, a former Burton city councilwoman and former state representative Paula Zelenko. Those of you who don't remember her, she is one of the members of the Smiley Rubber Stamp Council. For years, while she was on the Burton City Council, she was a cohort of some of the other council people who were part of the Smiley regime at that time. And she was a cohort of one of Smiley's top guys on the council, a fellow by the name of Leonard, who really, in my opinion, ripped off the city council or the city taxpayers when he got, I guess, 3 pensions as a city councilman, as a police officer, and he got another one. But anyway, he ended up with 3 pensions, all provided by Smiley and his cohorts, and was permitted to happen. I mean, it was an outrage. And she also served with Councilman Bob Santelli, named by the infamous land developer Blake Rizzo as a councilman he specifically bribed while Santilli was on the council. And Zelenko was a main source of support in getting Rizzo's project approved by the city council. And I think you have to remember those things. Now, she presently is doing everything she can to distance herself from her association with Smiley and his corrupt friends. In the article here, if I can find it, which I can't. Oh, here it is. The front page, Zelenko joins race for mayor, asks Smiley not to run. Well, that's clever. That's one of the ways she's trying to distance. But there's more to it than that. Originally, Smiley indicated that he was not going to run again and that he would support Zelenko and that she should get in the race. She did so. Now, he has not decided whether he's going to run or not, so she's putting it to him. Hey, you promised me you wouldn't run and you'd support me. So, anyway, as I say, while this is going on, she's trying to distance herself from the Smiley clan here. And that's, but that ain't going to happen. It ain't going to work. We've got documentation here, and we'll show it to you in a second, of evidence of her connection with Smiley and his friends. Remember, she is the woman, while on the council, along with Smiley and his 5 other council rubber stamps, that constantly created roadblocks for City Council woman Lori Tennant when she was trying to blow the lid off all this corruption down there. She fought Zelenko. She fought Bronard. She fought Wells. She fought Santelli and others. She was the only one raising the issue because the others were part of the Smiley team, including Zelenko. She continued to place hurdles along with the others before Tennant in trying to expose these corrupt practices. She was one of the main sources of aid to the ripoff of the Burton taxpayers. We showed you that before on this program, of her attending parties, celebrating the screwing of the Burton taxpayers. You know, when you look at the Burton minutes, Zelenko was prominently mentioned as the prime obstructionist in Tennant's efforts to expose the Smiley-Rizzo unholy alliance, which was the result of what's going on in federal court today, where Smiley's top guy, Abbey, was convicted recently of bribery and extortion. And there'll be others that'll be charged, in my opinion. You know, because of the people on this council, like Zelenko, the disclosures of this corruption took Tennant probably an extra 3 or 4 years before someone in power would finally listen to her. Here it was Art Bush, the prosecuting attorney. He's the one that started the investigation, primarily from the prodding of Lori Tennant. She kept after him, year after year, and finally she struck gold as far as eventually saving money for the taxpayers of Burton. The fact of the matter is the Burton taxpayers would have saved a lot more money and a lot more of their tax money if Zelenko had joined with Tennant to expose the Smiley administration's wrongdoing. And you knew what was going on. She knew what was going on. Of course, if she did that, she'd have to expose her own cozy relationship with the corruptors and the corrupted. Let's look at, as I said, let's look at some of the telltale signs of who the real Paula Zelenko is and who she's beholden to. Here we have the campaign contribution search results that we looked at here. Here's the first one, right on the first one. Blake Rizzo gave her money. And then she has all these big organizations like Blue Cross Blue Shield, Beer and Wine Distributors Association, all giving her money. Oh, and here's another one, a fellow by the name of Arabo, who made a ton of money by constructing a apartment building over by City Hall, in which he pays no taxes. He pays a fee. Of course he gave her money. She helped everybody along on that deal, I'm sure. And Linda Hammond from the state representative Hammond. He's part of the Smiley group. She funds him. Bob Santelli contributed to her campaign. Larry Bronner, another one of Smiley's people. Burton Democratic Club. Alfred Kloss, another big builder who got a hell of a deal. They built roads and infrastructure for him in one of his subdivisions, and he still hasn't paid them back yet. And nobody's raising heck about it. Big contributor to her campaign. Big Smiley supporter. And here's Charles Smiley's contribution. Jeff Wright's contribution. Danny Wells, one of the council people that supports Smiley, fought Lori Tennant all the time. Charles Abbey contributes to her. Other builders, Matthew Lemieux contributes to her. And this is just a few of them, but they're all the characters that we know that were involved in the corruption that was exposed by Lori Tennant and then broadcast by the press covering the trial of Charles Abbey. She's part of this group. You know, the bottom line is this. If you want to rid yourself of the Smiley corrupt machine in this Burton City Hall and you want a fresh start, it seems to me you must choose someone who is not running a phony campaign that she is trying to suggest whatever her past problems were and associations were and what her past record was with Smiley and his friends. It means nothing. I don't think that's true. I think it does mean something, especially when you listen to what's going on in federal court. And we told you this about all those things that came out in federal court. We were telling you this for 2 or 3 years on this program. We exposed Rizzo. We exposed Smiley. We exposed Zelenko. You know, it really comes down to this. The only person so far in this race who is crystal clean and devoid from the Smiley stench is Lori Tennant. She's the politician who was primarily responsible in exposing the long-running corruption of Burton City Hall. I don't think there's any question about that. The prosecutor, Art Bush, who handled the original investigation, will tell you that. And I'm sure the U.S. attorney who handled the case will tell you that. Because they went to her to get the information. She was conscientiously gathering this information for the 3-4 years she was on the council. Before that, as a concerned citizen. Since then, as a concerned citizen. And still today, she gathers it. Again, if a Smiley clone like Zelenko was elected mayor, the same players that Smiley put in there would be running Burton City Hall and continue to pad their pockets at the taxpayers' expense. You know, in my opinion, what you'd be destined to get with Zelenko is another Smiley administration. Of course, this is the Smiley's master plan. If he can't be mayor, he wants a stooge in there. Now we'll have more information about Zelenko and some of these other candidates running. Because I think by the time the election comes up, they'll all be running from Smiley, even though they may be part of his team. They'll try to hide it. We won't let that happen. We'll tell you what's going on. And then we want to just quickly talk about, what's being done about above and beyond the call of duty to find the guy who committed this terrible crime on a woman and her daughter in broad daylight in the city of Flint. Can you play that video for me, please?
Minutes for a Flint woman and her 13-year-old daughter who claimed they were carjacked at gunpoint yesterday morning and dropped off in the middle of a West Side neighborhood in Flint. Tanya Clausell says this all started when she and her daughter stopped at the Marathon gas station at the corner of Chevrolet and Welch on their way to school yesterday morning. Tanya says a man asked her for money. Then, when she said she didn't have it, he pulled out a gun and carjacked them. She says he rifled through her purse and tried to fondle both of them. Tanya then told him to take the car, and she and her daughter managed to escape.
Oh, he just had me in fear. I don't feel safe here.
Police are looking for the man and Tanya's 2004 four-door Chevrolet Cavalier, which has a dent on the driver's side rear bumper. If you have any information, you are urged to call Flint Police. The Saginaw...
This is a serious crime. Her car is carjacked. She's assaulted with a gun. She's sexually assaulted. Her daughter sexually assaulted. She's robbed. She's told in another interview, she told about how she was forced to drive this guy around town for about an hour, 2 hours before they escaped. They stopped the car and jumped out and ran. That was scary because apparently this guy had a gun. He could have shot him. Now, what more serious crime could there be other than maybe murder? Abduction, robbery, sexual assault, carjacking. What I want to know is why we haven't heard anything about this case since it happened last week. Now, if I'm prosecutor, I'm saying to the police department, how many guys you got assigned to this case? I want 8, 10 detectives working on this case. Take them off B&Es, take them off simple assault for the time being, and get on this case. This is serious. This is a Flint citizen and her daughter that were assaulted in this way. Now, I realize it's up in the north end, and I think I have the question. And I don't say this trying to be a racist or anything, but I wonder if the same attention would be given to somebody off Miller Road that ran into the same problem. I suggest you it would be on the front page of the Flint Journal, lead story on the television stations every day since it happened. That's my opinion. I've been in there before. I know how the police and the prosecutors operate. What's going on with this case? That's what makes you wonder if, because it was up in the north end of Flint and these people may have been black people, that nobody's taking it seriously. Or not as seriously as it should be. How much effort has been made here? I don't know, because we never hear. We've tried to find out. Police chief is out of town, so we couldn't find out. But we think it's strange that nothing is being reported. But anyway, we'll keep on this. We'll be reporting to you every week on it till we find out what's going on. And this guy should be caught. He's driving around this woman's car. And if they found the car, they should be able to take fingerprints. They ought to be able to find out who this guy is. We'll tell you what's going on here. We're going to stay on it. Do we have time to play that story from yesterday on the capture of that fellow that shot those 3 people in Troy? If we do, play it.
I don't have it.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess we don't have time. But anyway, you remember yesterday that the Genesee County Sheriff's Department captured, along with the state police, a person who had assaulted and shot 3 people in Troy at an accounting office. 2 people were wounded, and the third one, a woman, was killed. Apparently the guy made a run for it and started driving up 75, and just as he's driving up 75, and there's a description on the radio, a driver, a citizen, sees the car go by and recognizes the license number, calls the authorities. Now Channel 5 says he called them first. I don't know, but anyway, the authorities are called, and it goes out on the radio. And just fortuitously, a sheriff's car is going over an overpass over 75 when he hears the call, turns onto the expressway on the 75 where they thought this person was, and there the guy is. And the chase goes on all the way to Bay City, where he is arrested. Now, we're told that the reason for the shooting was because he was upset he had been fired a couple of weeks before, and he was not happy with some of the people there. And this is how he manifested his anger, as killing one woman and wounding 2 other ones. So it was, this story got national news. It was on Bob Pickell, the sheriff, who should be commended, and his department commended for doing such a good job at getting this guy and arresting him. He was on national television, on CNN, and on the morning show today, and so he got a lot of press out of this. But fortunately, his department did a good job and made the arrest, and the guy is now in custody, and I would suspect that in every likelihood he will be convicted, because I'm sure there's a lot of witnesses. There has been no confession yet, but if you got 15, 20 witnesses that see him shoot somebody and run across the office with a gun in his hand, and then the police find the gun used in the car that he was driving when he was stopped, the shotgun, you've got a lot of good circumstantial evidence plus witness evidence. So I would suspect that this should be taken care of in a short period of time. They're probably going to charge this guy tomorrow, and from there he'll go to trial. Well, time is up, and we have a few other things we're going to talk about, but we'll get to them next week. So we'll see you next week, and in the meantime, we'll be at the White